Welcome back to Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion. I'm David Leitner, I'm your instructor, and today we are going to turn our attention to ethnography and ethnographic methods. This is the main bread and butter of anthropology. This is how we collect data on culture and how we also produce the reports that we make along the way. First question we should probably answer is, what is ethnography? Well, that's a complicated question because ethnography refers both to the methods we use to do research and the results of that research that we write up. So it uses various methods, but all of them are geared towards the same goal, which is trying to understand the quote unquote native point of view. But the result of all of that research is also usually a text, a film, or some other expression of a description of a group of people or a cultural phenomenon. Now, to complicate things even further, when we sort of collect all of these ethnographies together, sometimes we can do research called ethnology, where we're making cross-cultural comparisons on a regular basis. So the texts that you create for one culture might be consulted on in a different context later on. Now, we do ethnography by performing field work. And there are two main approaches to doing field work in anthropology. The first approach, and the more traditional one, is to do single-sided field work. That's where you draw a boundary around an area and you say, I am studying everything inside this boundary. Now, those boundaries can be drawn using an edic perspective, so an outsider's categories or perspective, or an emic perspective. How do the insiders actually see where the boundaries are drawn? Either way, though, the point of it is to describe everything happening within that boundary, within that culture. The second way is called multi-sided fieldwork, and its approach is one of following instead of drawing boundaries. You choose a quote-unquote actor to follow. This can be a person, a group, an object, a narrative, a style, etc. And the point is to describe everything that happens to this actor as it moves through different sociocultural environments. One great example of this from recent memory here is the book The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anat Singh. This is an ethnography not of a specific group of people, but of the different groups of human and non-human actors that matsutake mushrooms encounter in their travels. So she follows this mushroom, which is one that happens to resist large-scale production, in part because it can't be easily cultivated. Matsutake only grows usually in clear cuts, and it has to be foraged. It can't be sort of harvested the way you harvest wheat, for example. In the book, she shows that the mushroom encounters a rich network of actors, all of which have some sort of effect on, or at least some sort of demand on the mushroom. These actors range from the pine forests themselves, to loggers who want to do clear cutting, to Asian migrants, to foreign importers, and all of them have competing demands for this mushroom. What results is that in the process of drawing all of these encounters, Singh gives us a picture of late stage capitalism itself. So that's a very different way of doing ethnography. Now, most of the time nowadays, field sites consist of some mix of both approaches. But what they always have in common is that we are paying attention to who, what, when, where, and how things happen in our field site. We're looking for persons or groups, or in the case of Anat Singh, also expanding that definition of person to non-humans as well. We're looking at the things and the activities that occur. We're looking at time. We're looking at when things are happening. We're looking at how that affects the encounters between different groups. We're looking at the places that they occur in, and we're looking at how they actually happen. This brings us to what I like to call the ethnographic research cycle. The ethnographic research cycle, the fieldwork cycle, is kind of the pattern by which anthropologists do their research. It's the rhythm of research. It starts with pre-field work, then we enter the field, then we do our field work, then we leave the field, we write up the results of that work, and then we might return to the same field site, or we might go into pre-field work for a new field site later on. So I'm going to go into more detail about each of these. Pre-field work is the period where we're trying to get a handle on what research has been done about this group of people, this phenomenon, this question before. What are the interesting research questions that haven't been answered yet? So we're doing a lot of library research and database research. We might even be doing some preliminary visits to potential field sites because we're going to be making contacts and trying to get permissions and funding. We'll be, if necessary, we'll be acquiring a new language and learning that local language, or at least a language that will be useful in that field site. And we will be developing a number of questions that we plan on asking in the field site. Now, when it comes to actually entering the field, this is a brief period right at the beginning of field work where there is something called culture shock that occurs. You will be navigating politics without really knowing very much about them. By politics, I don't mean Republican, Democrat. What I mean are like interpersonal politics. And you will be trying to make friends and also find people who will be willing to be informants. And this is an important period because this is the period where some of the strongest impressions that you have are going to occur. You're going to be noticing differences in everything. And a lot of anthropologists later on go back to those initial field notes they took at the beginning of fieldwork and find that those initial impressions were some of the most important ones that they had. Now, culture shock itself is worth going into a little more detail about. Another author, not your textbook author that we're using this semester, but Eric Luke Lassiter, has described culture shock as the meeting of two or more systems of meaning in the body and in the psyche expressed as anxiety, inappropriate behavior, or physical illness. That might seem like kind of a weird way to describe the experience of moving to a new place, but this is exactly what happens, whether you're doing field work or not. It is inevitable. There's no getting around culture shock. It's going to happen. All you can do is try and figure out how you're going to handle it. The anxiety comes about from not knowing all the rules, not necessarily having people you can fall back on and rely on emotionally or for practical matters. You will be lonely. Homesickness definitely occurs during this time period. You're going to be making faux pas left and right. Sometimes people will be very understanding of that. Sometimes they won't be. And that's very unpleasant. There are going to be unintentional misunderstandings on your part. You will not communicate effectively, and that is something you have to deal with. It's also possible because of you're relatively naive, you're going to get taken advantage of by some people. And sometimes you're going to be rude to people without meaning to be. All of this is unavoidable, but I should say, while it's both very personal, it's going to involve your very personal emotional and psychological well-being, and sometimes also it's going to be physical. It's going to may involve new diseases that you haven't had, like new strains of the cold, new flus, malaria, all sorts of other things. But it's also, you are going to be surrounded by new tastes, new sounds, new smells, all of these things. But here's the really important thing. This is also the one of the most useful, most productive periods of field work. We learn from our mistakes. So making mistakes sometimes is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Mistakes are where people tell us where the boundaries really are. Um, Sometimes it's hard for people to articulate culture just off the cuff. But believe me, I might have a hard time telling you what is rude, but the moment cut in front of me in line, I'm going to let you know that that was a boundary. Um, Many anthropologists also trace their ultimate insights and their strongest descriptions back to this period. It's a period when you're most aware of what's happening around you, even if you don't understand it. The ethnographic fieldwork cycle continues with fieldwork proper. You've entered the field, now you're getting to work. Here we're doing participant observation, we're taking field notes, we're doing surveys, mapping, taking photos, videos, and using other kinds of research tools. We'll also be repeatedly reflecting on field notes and revising the assumptions and questions we came to the field work with. In fact, it's kind of a joke. We understand that, the research proposal you write up to go to the field with is going to contain research questions we know you're not going to answer. You're going to come back and realize those weren't the right questions to ask. And that's fine. That's part of the point of going to the field. Now, one of the key things that you're going to be doing at the beginning of field work is establishing rapport. You're trying to meet people, you're trying to gain their trust, not in a Machiavellian sort of way, but you're trying to make friends, find people you can rely on to kind of be your guides through the culture. Some of these people become what we call key informants. These are the ones who are especially talkative about their culture. They're willing to communicate and curious about this. Paul Rabineau has actually noted that actually there's something unusual about informants because they're already kind of aligned with the anthropologist in terms of the fact that they are curious about these things as well. They have thought about them enough that they can explain them to you. Rapport takes trust. It may involve doing favors, but it also has political consequences. If you make friends with the wrong clan or the wrong neighborhood leaders, you may make enemies of others. People are also going to sometimes see befriending you as a status, a way to increase their own status. So again, you may be used on occasion. The toughest thing about rapport is you can't force it, right? It's built on other people's terms, not on yours. But the point of doing all of this is to help you slowly move from being an outsider to becoming more and more of an insider. Even if you can never completely be an insider, you're trying to move in that direction. And as a result, sometimes lasting friendships and relationships come about. In fact, actually, oftentimes in some societies, in order for you to even have a place in the village or in the town, you need to be part of someone's family. And so part of entering the field is also finding someone willing to adopt you into their family. This, of course, poses other problems because now you're a member of the family, you're going to have obligations as well. Now, fieldwork itself, the work of understanding culture, is a very slow process. It's achieved through participant observation and reflection. So it's often an unconscious process, which is why it's so important that we record our thoughts and observations and feelings on a regular basis. Uh, Field notes record what you saw, what you felt, what you thought. Interviews, including just regular conversations with people, help you gain insight into how other people saw and felt and thought about the things that occurred. And between field notes and interviews, you're going to be constantly refining your understanding of culture. Throughout this process, you're going to be working as a participant observer. That is, in anthropology, we don't just think of observation as a useful thing in and of itself unless you also participate. You have to become involved in the scene. And that's because there are a lot of little nuances that an observer will miss. Even if they're asking questions, there are things that won't occur to you to ever ask and won't occur to the people you're observing to even tell you because they'll just seem like normal things to them. Participant observation is just one method that we use in research to research culture, but it's also the main one that we use and is really identified with anthropology. But it's rarely the only method we use. The key to participant observation is doing the things other people are doing, what they do, when they do it, where they do it, how they do it, and then observing, recording those things in some way, whether it's in writing or in film or video or some other way. You want to capture the who, what, when, where, and how of people doing things, as well as capturing your own thoughts and feelings about all of this. You're going to have a lot of them. And in addition to making those recordings, you want to periodically be going back and reflecting, rereading those notes a few weeks or months later, and you'll be struck by how differently you think about things now, or how many things you forgot about as well. The next stage in the ethnographic fieldwork cycle, sadly, is leaving the field. You will generally have spent sometimes as short as 6 months, usually closer to a year to 2 years in the field, at the field site. You may have occasionally left and come back, but for the most part, that has been your life for a couple of years. And when you come back home, you actually go through a reverse culture shock. Remember, you've been acculturating to a new culture this whole time. Now you have to come back. You're not the same person that you were. You sometimes have to relearn your own culture's habits. I remember one of the hardest things for me to remember to do when I came back to the United States after living in Europe for a long time was relearning how to tip. And in the time that I had been gone, actually, the amount people tip in the United States had changed. It had increased from 10% for an okay job and 15% for a typical, tip, to now then 20% had become the norm. So I had to really readjust to remember to tip people, number one, and to remember to tip them the right amount, number two. When you're leaving the field, you're also going to be reflecting on your experiences. You'll be reviewing notes and interviews, in other words, your data, and you're going to be reading and writing and occasionally maybe even returning to the field again for short periods. Finally, you're going to start writing up. So you're going to take all that stuff that you've learned in the field and start to try and analyze it and find ways of presenting it. You're also going to subject it to peer review. Other people who have a lot of knowledge in similar topics or the same group of people or something like that will get to look at your findings and say, hey, have you thought about this? Why haven't you written about this? Did you know about this? Eventually, after peer review, you will publish those findings in some form, usually as what we call a monograph, or an ethnography is usually a single book written by a single person. Now, since we're talking about writing or publishing, we have to talk also about what it means to represent culture. We talked a little bit last time in the theory lectures about the crisis in the postmodern turn in the 1980s and how big a deal issues of representation were back then. Well, we haven't forgotten that. Um, Writing an ethnography is no different from any other genre of writing. You are going to make deliberate choices about how you represent people, places, things, events, etc. I like using this Gary Larson cartoon here in part because he's doing something very interesting that sort of echoes one of the points of the writing culture turn, which is that these explorers are literally breaking the fourth wall. Well, and actually, the joke is that they can't break out of the fourth wall, but they're doing it while breaking the fourth wall, and talking to us, making us aware that we are not looking at real jungle explorers, but actually observing a cartoon in the process. Positioning yourself as a researcher, as a man or woman or non-binary, as gay, straight, bisexual, as a member of a particular race or particular ethnicity. All of these things matter because they gave you a unique perspective on that culture, and they also may involve power dynamics that you needed to be aware of while you were in that culture. You may not even have been aware of them at the time, but you need to be thinking about them. So when we write up, the medium we're writing in matters. How you present things in film is a little different than how you do in text or images or through oral presentations. The audience for your work matters. Are you producing it for other anthropologists? Are you writing for academics in general? Are you writing it for government officials or the general public? The purpose matters. Are you simply trying to create a body of scientific knowledge that you're sharing with the scientific community? But in the process, what other things are you accomplishing? Are you trying to persuade people? Are you trying to inform them? Are you trying to entertain? Because, there's nothing worse than a really badly written ethnography to try and read. Um, but also, you could be trying to affect policies with this as well. Ethnography is a genre of writing. It has its own stylistic conventions. It has a voice that you need to take into consideration, and you are speaking from a particular position. So you need to think about who are you speaking to, but also who are you speaking for, and in what ways are you actually allowed to speak for them or not? And in what ways are you allowing them to speak for themselves? Finally, we come to the end of the ethnographic fieldwork cycle. Here, you're either going to return to the field because, as I mentioned, these field sites are not neutral sites. Oftentimes, people create lifelong relationships with the people they worked with. You may be returning to confirm your findings or to drill down and explore other questions. You may be rethinking unanswered questions you had. Usually, when you return this time, culture shock is much less acute, and finding informants obviously isn't as hard. But things do change in those sites. Time moves on, people get older, some people move away, new people move in. So it's always going to be a changing field site. It's not like you've captured this site for once and forever. The other possibility is that you can also go off and start a new field site and start this whole cycle over as well. And that's the general tempo of ethnographic fieldwork. And why anthropologists do it is because we have found that this is the best way to get at what has sometimes been called the mundane imponderabilia of life. That is, what are all those little nuances, those little things that go unsaid that people have a hard time telling you? How do you figure them out? And this is the method that we have developed over the course of more than 100 years to reflect on that. Anyways, that'll do it for this time. And I will talk to you again soon. And I hope you take care of yourselves. And until then, goodbye.